Fat Stormtrooper from Daft Chicken Gaming. I guess this is a topic I'm going to talk about is a topic that is controversial. I think from the first step is I've come from one of the first generations who've seen computers in the house all the time. I mean, I've never been without a computer. I've always been brought up with games, video games as part of my life. I'm an adult now. I'm a professional, and I have I have a deep respect for people who develop games as well as people who do non-video based games. So this is basically a topic that came up recently with a couple of my friends when we went out to dinner, and they asked me to do a little vlog on what I thought about video games and violence. So I just look at a few articles, and maybe that will give you my view. This is a article by CNN. Do video games lead to violence? So the first thing is Trump blaming video games. There's gun control laws and video games. Well, that's interesting. So let's blame the video games and not the drunkenness, not the drugs, not the poor socioeconomic status, not the excessive amount of freely available firearms, but let's just blame the fucking video games. Basically, you know, this report is sensationalizing, saying I'm hearing more and more people saying, okay, that the level of violence of video games is really shaping young person's thoughts. And then you go a further step, and that's the movies. You see the movies, they are so violent. Okay. And yet America has one of the biggest industries centered around those movies, which are a lot of them violent, because that's what the audience wants. There's a survivor of the February 14 shootings at Stoneman Douglas College. I grew up playing video games, first-person shooter games, and I would never dream of taking the life of any of my peers. I grew up playing shooter games and other games where there was destruction of virtual property and virtual characters. I would never dream of unjustly shooting somebody. Self-defense would be a different story. In Munich, Germany, an 18-year-old gunman killed 9 people, was a fan of the first-person shooter games. Well, half of the freaking population in this age group are actually fans of computer games. Well, duh. I mean, well, that's just a normal demographic. So the American Psychological Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics take a firm stance against children playing video games. So these basically middle-aged upper crust or elderly doctors don't like it. Psychological Group reports more than 90% of children play video games. 90%. Okay, among the kids between 12 and 17, the number rises to 97%. 85% of video games have violence. The titles seem to say it all: Manhunt, Thrill Kill, Gears of War, Mortal Kombat. However, even the seemingly Pokemon Go requires players to go to battle. Pokemon Go? Right, great article. You're a dickhead. The American Psychological Association demonstrated a link between video game use and both increases in aggressive behavior, decreases in pro-social behavior, empathy, and moral engagement. Now, I've looked at this paper, and this is not really supported by evidence. There's an absence of statistical evidence. There's no multivariate analysis. Really, they are just saying that this is an association, but this is an association based on what we call eminence-based medicine rather than evidence. Eminence meaning the evident professor, versus evidence meaning the fact that you actually really have evidence for it. The overall, the Academy's summary results from 400 studies revealing a significant link. Usually when you have 400 studies, from my point of view, you normally would do what we call a systematic review of the literature, which involves complex statistics, looking at these studies for validity, and a rigid sort of, a rigorous analysis of the studies statistically. This has really not been done. It's just been still, again, a generalisation. The Academy noted that they should not use human or other living targets to award points for killing. That's most of the fucking games, you fucking moron. Because it teaches the children to associate pleasure and success with their ability to cause pain and suffering for others. No, it doesn't. It teaches you the ability to shoot a virtual character. There is the absence of pain and death. There is an absence of physicality. This is a virtual character on the stream, and people can tell the difference, even children. Okay, there's a clear nonsense argument that appeals to many parents, okay, because parents like this, the fact that we should do nothing, but when they used to do stuff. Kids who like to play brutal video games may have a disposition towards aggression. May have. Where is your evidence? Does it cause it to act violently? In his own study, it included 6,500 8th graders. Amongst the questions, students were asked whether they had played a video game in the past year. DeCamp found out the propensity to play video games, along with other factors. He discovered that playing video games, no matter how bloody, did not predict violent behaviour. This is one of the only big studies. Okay, 6,500 8th graders. Basically, Christopher Ferguson at Stetson actually thinks that they actually may reduce violence. You young males, I mean, hey, you're playing video game, you're not going to go out and rape someone, are you? No, you're going to play a video game. I'm addicted to TF2. It's better than going out stealing cars. It's better than going and having a street fight or a knife fight, you know. Persuasive evidence comes from the economic study published in 2016, which looked at violent criminal offences in the weeks after the release of popular games. Tracking sales and crime rates, they discovered a general society violence decrease in the weeks after the appearance of a new edition of a popular title. Decreased. So if people have got new video games to play, they're less likely to go out and buy. Good on you, Ferguson. No worries, Fergie. Basically, outdated and problematic statements of video violence. Okay, so where does all these outdated and really crappy statements come from? Where do they really come from? Okay, I guess the thing is this is probably a look at it. Brown versus the Entertainment Merchants Association, 2011. Basically, video games were covered under the First Amendment, but that video games could not be regulated by governments. Part of the reason was there was the psychological research linking violent games was unpersuasive. This is a court found this. Moral panics over the potentially damaging effects of video violence children are hardly new. And then there was basically Wertham's Frederick Wertham was a chap that wanted to get rid of all violent comic books. But there have been pressure groups to get rid of movies, television, internet, anything with violence at all. Now, one of the biggest haters of video games was this guy here, 1983. U.S. surgeon. No, what? A surgeon? Surgeons are good experts on video games. There is a surgeon simulator, so that makes him an expert by definition. General C. Everett Koop implicated them as a leading cause of family violence. I thought alcohol, sexual abuse, a previous history of an abusive family, poor financial status would account for the majority of these domestic violence situations, but apparently it's a leading thing. So games such as Death Race, to run over gremlins. Okay, so run over gremlins means I'm going to hit my wife. Oh my god. Oh shit. Custer's Revenge, with a naked Custer avoiding arrows to have sex with a Native American woman. Okay, yeah. That's better. Let's play that video game or go out and rape someone. I would think that playing the video game is not so bad. In 1994, the game industry established the Educational Software Rating Board, ESRB, a voluntary system. Okay. Controversy was not continued. The Columbine High School shooting. Family members of the shooting victim sued 25 video game companies, which they blamed for the deaths. In particular, the game Doom. Oh fuck! I used to play Doom. Hello, but I didn't go and shoot all my fucking classmates or all my fucking university things or work colleagues or my family. I mean, for fuck's sake. Influenced by the massacre, the question when media violence had been caused. During the hearings, Senator Joe Lieberman, who's campaigning against video games created this rating system, raised the apparent connection. Media violence could turn children into killers. What about the news? Why don't we censor the fucking media? Because they present a lot of shit on the news about murders and rapes, and kids might get the feel from it from just watching the news. Senator John McCain suggested that the rating scheme was nothing but a smokescreen to provide cover for immoral and unconscious business practices. Okay. There's a sharp rise in research studies examining them, and then there's this Christopher Ferguson. Basically, many of these scholars working in this area had an immoral panic. And at the end of the day, you know, handing down video games, the First Amendment, the Supreme Court has taken a hard stand on the credibility of psychological research in general. The only really robust study is Ferguson's, which shows no link in 8th graders, as far as I'm concerned. So I guess that it comes back to, you know, video games. There's a few meta-analyses about a correlation of 0.15, which is not really that large between video games and violence. And I talk about meta-analysis and systematic review of the literature. Again, the question is whether these studies are in fact biased. Maybe there is a very small link between aggression and video games, but I don't necessarily think that's everything, because people that play video games that are violent may already be tempered towards violence because they have a violent relationship. They may have seen a lot of media depicting violence. And to tell you the truth, I mean, countries that sort of saber rattle and have a big army, they promote to people feeling violence. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so playing violent games have been found to have 13 to 22% increase in adolescents' violent behaviour. By comparison, smoking accounts for 14% of an increase in lung cancer. I've looked at that paper. I don't buy it. I mean, there's so many dodgy papers. Really, the only big study is that one by Ferguson, which didn't show a link. 6,500. Most of the other studies are reasonably small. Okay, so let's go on to the next thing. I mean, this guy who was a hater back here, Everett Koop. Let's look at some of his quotes. Protection of a mother as an excuse for an abortion is a smokescreen. In my 36 years of pediatric surgery, I've never known one of the instances where the child had to be aborted to save the mother's life. He's a pediatric surgeon. He doesn't deal with adults. Yeah, right. So all your pregnant children, pediatric surgeon. You're not an obstetrician. So, of course you've not seen any, because you're not an obstetrician. You're not from the correct specialty, Everett Koop. Drugs don't work in patients who don't take them. Well, that is true, but drugs also sometimes, in patients that do take them, for example oxycodone, can completely fuck up their lives. So that's another pearl of wisdom, Everett Koop, from the Fat Stormtrooper. Healthcare is vital to all of us some of the time, but public health is vital to us all the time. Now, I think that's really good, public health, cleaning up the place and bins and all the rest of it. Yeah, I mean, I think it is vital. It's not vital, but it's highly desirable, and it rids disease, but also good health and good diet. I don't think you can really differentiate these days. The American ideal is not that we all agree with each other or even like each other every minute of the day. It's rather that we respect each other's rights, especially the right to be different. Well, okay, yeah, there's some good thoughts in that one. Life affords no greater responsibility, no greater privilege than the raising of the next generation. Well, it's responsibility, privilege. We are biological beings. We have sex. We produce children. Responsibility. Yeah, okay, well, what about the responsibility not to kill people or hurt people? That's a pretty damn thing. Or no greater privilege. Well, somebody who's, basically had a kid and more or less have been sort of put in, forced to marry someone, is that a privilege? Or they've got inadvertently pregnant and decided to keep the kid because for religious beliefs, is that a privilege? Everett, dude, it's not always a privilege to be pregnant, and sometimes, people, especially young mothers, it's a significant burden on them and a significant burden on their lives. So it's a really, you're a black and white man. There's no grey with you. It's apparent. This is obviously with the video games thing too. 35 years. Okay, okay, that's about the abortion thing. Well, you're a paediatrician. You're an idiot. You're a paediatric surgeon. 1,000 people stop smoking today. Their funerals will be held sometime in the next 3 or 4 days. I agree with that. Smoking kills people. They're fucking stupid. They should just fucking ban it. Best prescription is knowledge. The choice of diet can influence your long-term health prospects more than any other action you might take. Well, why are you so hung up with video games, tosser? Cigarette smoking is clean and dying as the chief preventable cause of death in our society. Okay. I'm just trying to see when all of the Western world raises its children uncircumcised, and it seems logical that the extent of health knowledge in those countries such as practice must be safe. He liked to talk a lot about smoking. There are three things you can do to marry literacy and health. Who cares? You can't talk of the danger of snake poisoning and not mention snakes. Oh, profound stuff. So this guy, he's a pediatric surgeon, suddenly becomes an expert on the psychology of violence in video games. It's like saying a plumber is an expert on aviation or aerodynamics, or for example, a garbologist is an expert on high fidelity sound systems, etc. So basically, there are some quotes from this guy. Yeah, fair enough. He was really eminent, and again, eminence versus evidence base. Let's get on to the next thing. Do they really make them more aggressive? Okay. A few days ago, this is 2016, 300 studies at APA This is the apo-violent thing. Despite claiming the review demonstrates a link, the authors acknowledged that the sub-studies were inconsistent because they were poorly designed. And they were designed, sometimes studies are designed to prove a point. So you design the study to prove the outcome you want. So think of the outcome, then design the study to find it. A consistent relationship between violent and aggressive behaviour. No single risk factor leads people to behave violently. This is we're talking about the Sandy Hook Elementary, Newtown, Connecticut. 20 students. The shooter, Adam Lanza, spent most of his time playing violent and non-video games in his home. Super Mario Brothers. Whoa! That is fucking violent. Dance Dance Revolution. Now I think the Dance Dance Revolution is the most likely one to cause him to shoot people. I guess the question is, how about depression? How about the fact that he hasn't got avenue in life? How about the fact that he's worried about the fact that his mum and dad doesn't love him, he can't get a girlfriend, he's not got a career, he won't get a job, all those sort of fundamental factors. Maybe you start looking at fixing those rather than blaming video games. Numerous risk factors for aggressive behaviour. Okay. Numerous. Okay. Basically, 300 between 2015, including 4 meta-analysis attempts to spot a pattern. Okay, all of these are very poor sort of reviews, and no real systematic review has been done that I've seen. Yes, okay. I am not really supportive that video games do cause violence. Okay, it's time to end the debate about video games and violence. This is February of this year, 2018. Valentine's Day, Brownwood County, Florida High School. A familiar trope is reemerged. Often when a young man's a shooter, we try to play video games. Young man, testosterone, violence, depression, often with free access to firearms. 2 students were killed and others wounded. 15-year-old shooter in Kentucky. We can't celebrate death in video games, celebrate death in TV shows, celebrate death in movies, and celebrate death in musical lyrics, and remove any sense of morality and sense of higher authority. Yeah, exactly. A lot of rock songs talk about killing people or dying. This is the 2011 thing again. Media psychology. More or less, there's a lack of an evidence of a link. So-called history of what we call moral panic. Okay? Whenever something goes wrong, we basically blame something. We had the guy who blamed the comics books. Tipper Gore blamed pop and rock music in the 1980s for Satanism and sex and violence. God forbid. Teenagers and young people might want to have sex. I mean, stone the crows and kick down the fucking dunny door. What the fuck? I mean, why would they want to have sex? Why would they want to, get their hormones up, which is part of nature? Primates fight. Chimpanzees may kill each other over mates. Bonobos, which are the little chimpanzees, don't tend to do it much. They're more into mass orgies, but the bigger ones certainly do fight over mates and can often may even kill each other. So I guess there's also conflicts of interest, lack of transparency. People's morality is coming in and clouding the studies. So in conclusion, there is no real evidence of video games as indicated by Ferguson's study, which probably looks at the most number of children, 8th graders, 6,500. There has been some weak correlation between violence and video games, but this is influenced by multiple confounding factors. And really, in the cold light of day, nobody has done a very robust multivariate statistical analysis which has adequately weighted all of the other factors which may cause somebody to be violent. The presence of alcohol abuse in the family, the presence of a broken family, the presence of a criminal history in the family. So all of these things have not been controlled for, and people have just pulled out of their ass the fact that video games are linked. And the answer is, if something is very common, okay, 97% of these teenagers are playing video games, it's very easy to blame it, because you'll say, oh, he played video games. Well, the chances of him not playing video games is 3 out of 100, and the chances, even if you just pluck him out of the air of playing video games, is 97%. So most violent people that commit violent crimes will have played violent video games, especially if they're males. The bottom line is that if common things occur commonly, so if you're going to go and start analysing this, you're going to find that people are exposed to violent things in our society, and that's just the way our society is. So in conclusion, there is no real evidence for video games causing violence. A lot of the hype has been propagated by people like the pediatric surgeon that we talked about, and by this by often religious and misguided morality. And if you want to start looking at violence, why not look at the media that shows real life events before you look at video games? Why not look at the presence of broken families, unemployment, drugs, in particular drugs of stimulant drugs, but also other drugs? Why not look at ways in which young people can seek help rather than having to act out like this, etc. So I mean, basically, there are a lot of other things that you need to look at before a video game, and the other big thing is the presence of weapons and fucking guns that you can get. I mean, that is just like a pair of dog balls that you cannot miss it. It's just hanging there, okay? And if you're going to start waving your finger at the video games, but what about the fucking guns that are everywhere? I mean, for fuck's sake, grow up. Peace.